Hi, I'm Mike from Craft Supplies USA, and today we're going to turn a bespoke ring blank from Hobble Creek Craftsman. We just got in a bunch of new colors of these blanks. These were the pen blanks that we were carrying. We wanted them in ring blanks, and so Mark has come up with some really cool patterns and variations and made these available for rings now. So the color combinations and patterns are extremely striking and some of the best ring blanks that I've seen. Some of my favorite things about these new bespoke blanks are they have extremely high figure and swirling throughout each piece, and each one's a little bit different. The other nice thing is that these are cast out of Alumilite, so they're very forgiving to turn and easy to get to a really high gloss polish. So now that we have our supplies here, let's get this set up and we can get into the turning. Alright, for the ring core that we're using, this is the JDG. It has an 8mm wide channel, and we want a really precise fit on this ring, so we'll be using the boring head for the majority of the fitting process of the core to the blank. And the first thing we need to do is make sure that one side of our blank is sanded nice and flat, and then we have a waste block in our chuck or on a screw chuck, something like that, that also has a nice flat face that we can double face tape and pressure hold this. Using the tape, then we can get our boring head and core this out to fit our core. So right now I've just got a piece of scrap wood. I've faced this off. It's got a nice clean straight wall here. That's going to give us a really good bond with our tape. And then I've sanded this side of our blank here nice and flat. Alright, so we have our blank sanded nice and flat, and we have our waste block. This is nice and flat, so that'll give us a good bonding surface for our tape. And then this tape, this is the Permacell double-sided tape. We've had bad experiences with some other double-faced tape in the past, so that's why we switched to the Permacell. We've had really good results with it ever since. So I highly recommend this tape. This will give you the best bond you can get. But we'll press that down onto the face here, give that a little bit of a tack before we go to peel the backing off. Then we'll just peel these off here, and then I like to roll that over, get that out of my way. And then just center this as best you can on your scrap block. It doesn't have to be perfect. The scrap block's about 1/8 of an inch smaller than the ring blank itself, so it looks like it's running pretty true. Once you get that on there, just tacked on, use your quill. We'll use that pressure because this is a pressure sensitive adhesive. It needs a fair amount of pressure to get that to set up really well. So we'll lock our tailstock down and then just give that some pressure with our quill. We'll let that sit for 10-15 seconds and we should have a good bond. If you need to, or if you have a bunch of excess tape, you can get your skew and just trim some of this off. Okay, I think we're all set. So I'll set my skew off to the side and we can get our boring head. We have a longer in-depth video on using the boring head, but this is a really good option for getting your rings to the exact width and the opening to fit your cores, and you can get a really tight fit so there's no gaps. So what I like to do with this initially is I'll center up the cutter and we'll make a pass basically 3/4 of the way through the blank, just a small hole about 1/2 inch in diameter, and that'll give us clearance for that cutter to cut across the face of this and get the width that we need exactly right. So the ring core itself overall is 8mm wide, but the channel when it's pressed together is 6mm wide, and that's exactly what we need so we don't have any gaps between the core and the blank. So we'll use the boring head to face that off. So let's turn our lathe on. And right now we're at about 1000 RPM. Don't need to go too much faster than that. But I'll bring that cutter closer to center and we'll go about 3/4 of the way through the blank. The nice thing too about these boring heads is they have a bunch of cutters that come with them in the case, and you can touch them up with a little diamond hone or a CBN wheel if you have one. Okay, we're about halfway through the blank there. Go just a little bit further and then we can start getting our overall width that we need. So I'll set that and I'll lock the quill down, and then I'll start adjusting the cutter outwards. And that's going to give us a nice square blank, and then it'll help us get that thickness we need. So once you go out to the edge, bring it back to center, and then we'll advance that cutter in just a little bit further. And then once we start getting closer to our desired width, I'll get my calipers out and measure it and make sure we get that exact 6mm wide core. If you wanted to and you had a really narrow parting tool, you could part most of that off and save it for a narrow ring core later down the road. But I don't have any plans to do that, so I'm just going to remove this material. Okay, I think we're getting in the ballpark of where we need to be, so I'll back the cutter off, bring my cutter back to center, and then we'll get our calipers out and see exactly how wide the blank is right now. Clean off these chips. We'll get our digital calipers out here and just see exactly what we're running. Okay, right now we're at 8.28, so we have just over 2 mil left to go. Alright, so we're just 2 millimeters thicker than what we need to be, so we'll bring that cutter back to center. We'll stop the lathe and check again. And make sure when you're using these calipers that you're not compressing the caliper over your double-faced tape. That's going to give you a false thickness. So you want to make sure you're just measuring the blank itself. So now we're at 7.19, so we still have a bit to go. One thing that's kind of handy is the little Allen key that it comes with. You can cut the bend off here and make a small little knob handle so you can rotate it a lot quicker. I couldn't find mine. I made one before. I don't know where it is though. So. Alright, let's stop the lathe and get our calipers out again. Alright, we're 6.5, so we're just a hair wider than what we need to be. I'll probably do one more pass, and then if we're still just a little bit proud, we can use some sandpaper to get to our final exact thickness that we need. Alright, I think we're pretty close. Let's take a look. Alright, 6.4. Move that tape out of the way so we can get a good reading. Yeah, 6.4. I think one more pass and we'll be there. Alright, 6.18, 6.14, yeah, 6.18, so we're just about there. I'll do one more final skim pass, and that should give us the thickness that we need, and then if we need to, we can touch it up with some sandpaper as well. Reset your cutter. Okay, I think that's going to be it. Okay. Yeah, 6.05 on that side. 6.05. So we'll use sandpaper just to touch that up and get rid of that 0.05 millimeter left. But But right now that we're pretty much established our thickness, let's get this open to fit that shoulder of our core. And then we're going to go all the way through the blank now. So let's bring our cutter back up. And before I go all the way through, I like to do a test fit. Just do a small cut, maybe a 1/64 of an inch deep, just so we can get close to our overall diameter before we go all the way through the blank. Okay, that's pretty close. That's about to drop in, so I think another pass or two and we'll be right to our final opening diameter that we need. Ooh, that's perfect. So there's just a hair amount of slop in there that's going to give us room for our glue when we glue this together. That's a really good fit. So let's go all the way through the blank now. And then you'll hear the sound change. As soon as we hit the double face tape, the sound will change, and that's when we need to stop. So you hear that sound change? We hit the double face tape and now I can see it. It's white underneath there, that's our double face tape. And then do another test fit and make sure everything fits good. That's perfect. So there's not a ton of slop in there. That's a pretty good fit. Now we can get our core out and then we can pull this off the lathe. So we'll take our boring head out as well. And we'll just set that off to the side. And then when you're removing this, this is pretty delicate right now because we're pretty thin. It's the width of the core is pretty thin as well. So we want to be nice and gentle when we remove this from our tape. And because this is pressure sensitive adhesive, just slow, constant pressure and that tape will start to let go. So it doesn't take much, just give it some time. Don't try and force it off or else you can break your core, sorry, your blank. Okay, and then I'll peel the tape off this and then I can save this waste block for some more rings. So that's what we have right now. We've got this cord out to fit our ring core. Got a nice good fit there. There's no gaps or anything, but we still have enough room for glue to give us a good bond, and we should be good on our width. We just need to sand just a little bit off, and then we need to clean off that double face tape residue as well. So let's clean off the lathe bed and get our core prepped and ready for gluing. Alright, so right now before we sand this to our final thickness, I do want to remove our tape residue. That way we can get an accurate reading with those calipers. So I've got a rag with some denatured alcohol. That's going to break that adhesive down and then we can just peel this off. Okay, so we got the adhesive residue off here. Let's grab our calipers and we'll give it another check. So 6.01, 6.02. So we're right where we need to be basically. We're just going to take a hair off the surface, and what you want to do is get some sandpaper and do a figure 8 motion. That's going to keep that nice and level and sand all sides basically pretty much even. And we're not removing a lot of material here, so this paper is some 600 grit Abernet. Depending on how much you need to take off, you might want to go with a coarser paper or finer paper depending on what you're doing. So .0, 601. So we're just about there. I want to make sure that's exactly 6 millimeter or slightly under. I'd rather have it be a little bit smaller because what happens if the blank is too wide is when we press this together, there's going to be a gap on the inside of that core, which is not going to look very nice, and it's going to be a little bit of a catch hazard and be a little snaggy when you wear it. So we want to make sure that the blank itself is, if anything, be slightly under 6 millimeter wide. Let's grab our calipers and check again. Make sure your calipers are set to 0. All right, we're right at 6, 598 there. 6. Okay, I think we're gonna be just fine. So once you have this ready to go, let's grab a rag with some more denatured alcohol and just remove any dust or debris on here. We want to make sure that we have a really good bond between the core and the blank and get this surface prepped and ready for glue. And you can see all that dust we just got off there. So clean off your blank and then clean off the core itself. Make sure there's no dust or anything that's going to keep this from pressing together completely, as well as just removing any machine oils that might have been left over from when it was made. So we'll set that off to the side. Make sure that's nice and clean. As far as the adhesive goes, I'll be using the Glue Boost. This is the Fill and Finish Pro. This is really flexible stuff, which is what I'm looking for because the core and the blank are going to expand and contract at slightly different rates. So I wanted an adhesive that is going to give me some flex in there so it doesn't break the glue bond if one of them expands or contracts more so than the other. So I'll be using this Glue Boost, and what I'll do is I'll keep my waste block here and I'll be using the quill and the waste block to press this together as the glue sets up. So okay, so what I like to do is just do a thin coat on the inside of the core, and then I'll use that nozzle to spread it around. I don't want to get too crazy with the amount of glue I put on here because I'm going to get a lot that presses out and then I have to clean that up later. So what I'll do is I'll just rough press these together and then I'll set that up against my waste block. And we have to work fairly quickly because this glue sets up pretty quick, but we'll use that quill to press this whole thing together, and that'll help those parts press together nice and square. So give it some pressure with your quill, and then we can take it away and make sure everything is seated nice and well. So if I take a look here, we don't have any gap on the inside of the core. It means we pressed this together completely. And then if I look around the edges where the shoulder meets the blank, everything looks nice and even. So looks like it's seated really well. So let's hit it with some activator. Okay, I'll let this sit off to the side for a minute or two while I get everything else set up. So let's get our glue out of the way. And we'll be using the ring turning chuck, so we'll remove our 4-jaw chuck. Get the ring turning chuck set up on here. And as far as the bushings go, for this size of core I'm using the small bushings. And I like to run these with one taper on the inside and then one taper on the outside for these cores in particular. I think they run a little bit more accurately that way. So get your blank and core set up, and then we'll tighten down that brass nut. Alright, so we've got our ring blank and core set up on our ring turning mandrel. We've brought up our revolving center here for a little extra support, cuts down on the vibration, and we have our tool rest set up to turn. So I'll be using the spindle roughing gouge to get rid of the bulk of this material. Then we'll go to our skew to get our final passes and get it nice and flat. And then after that we'll get our carbide tool and we'll cut a small chamfer on each side of this core just to make it a little more comfortable as well. So let's bring this up to speed, and we'll be turning about 2,500 RPM. And we want to be nice and delicate because the blank is pretty thin. So be gentle on your cuts. Basically just start peeling this down. This resin is really nice. Hobble Creek Craftsman, he's using the Alumilite. It's a urethane resin, as I've been notified in the comments. It's not an epoxy. But it turns really easy and it polishes really well. So it's pretty forgiving. It's not as brittle as a lot of other blanks out there. But just take your time and go nice and slow and cut this down, and we'll get it pretty close to our final size with the spindle roughing gouge. Every now and again you need to clear the chips or the ribbons that get wrapped around the spindle so we can see exactly where we are. Okay, we've got about just under 1/8 of an inch there, and you can see that pattern is really starting to come out. Got some really good looking swirls going through here, and then once we start polishing this out and do a CA finish on it, it's really going to shine. So let's keep going with our spindle rough and gouge, and then we'll switch to our skew in just a moment. Okay, now that we're pretty close to our ring core, let's switch to our skew. I'll raise up my rest, and then we'll be using this as a negative rake scraper, just nice and flat. And I want the blank to be nice and flat and even with the shoulders of the core, and I want this to be nice and straight across. If you have a little wire brush or something, that'll help remove these little ribbons that get stuck to the mandrel. And obviously you want to make sure you're wearing like a dust mask or respirator, or have your dust collector going while you're doing this. Okay, we're just slightly proud of the core. So now we'll go to our sandpaper and just get that nice and flat. If we stop the lathe and take a look for a second, make sure that brass nut's nice and tight still. Just clean this off so we can see what we're doing. But go ahead and look at your core, see if you have any gaps. If you got your blank slightly too narrow, you can always add some black CA glue in there to fill it in, or white depending on what you're using. But we don't really have any gaps between the core and the blank. So that's exactly what we're looking for, a nice fit between those two parts. And then we're just slightly proud. It catches your fingernail a little bit, and we'll use the sandpaper to get that nice and flat. So I'll get my tool rest out of the way here. All right, and because I want this blank to be nice and flat, I'll set my sandpaper on my skew chisel because my skew is nice and flat, and I'll be using that as basically a sanding block for our sandpaper to make sure everything stays nice and flat across the surface. So I'll just wrap that around my skew, just the tang of the skew here, and we'll use that as a nice little sanding block to keep everything nice and flat. And I need to drop my speed down as well. About 1,000 RPM here. And then just work it back and forth and get that surface completely level. And then the cool thing about that Abernet is I can just flick it, get the dust out of the paper, and that way it'll start cutting nice and efficiently as well. Okay, just inspect our surface here. Alright, so now it's time we can get our CA finish. I just want to get rid of this material off our mandrel so we don't pick up any contaminants. And for our CA finish, I'll be using the Glue Boost. This is their ultra thin fill and finish. This stuff's thinner than water, so it'll level out really nice on the surface. And if you have any gaps between the core and the blank, it'll get down in there and wick into those surfaces and help seal everything up as well. So turn your lathe on nice and slow. We're about 200 RPM, and I'll just tear off a small amount of paper towel. And we'll probably just do 2 coats. But I like to fold this over into a little bit stiffer of a pad, and then we'll saturate the pad and then just work it back and forth a couple times, and that's all that needs. Hit it with a little burst of activator, and then grab another little strip of paper towels, and then we'll do 1 more coat. Alright, as that's activating, I've got my Merlon. This is the 2500 grit. We'll use that to refine that final surface before we go to polish it out. And I'll also be using the skew just to help keep everything nice and flat. And we'll put that Merlon directly on the tang here. Alright, once that glue is activated, we'll bump our speed back up. And then we'll just lightly abrade that surface, just knocking down any high points and leveling out the surface, as well as refining the surface of the core itself. Okay, and let's check the surface. Make sure we don't have any imperfections in our CA before we go to polish it. We want it nice and evenly matte. That means we've sanded the entire surface. Okay, that looks pretty good. So I'll get the Merlon out of the way. And on these cores in particular, I like to add a small 45-degree chamfer on each side of the core. We'll use a carbide tool to cut that. But it gives it a little bit better feel when you're wearing it. It feels less bulky when you knock these corners off. So I'll get my tool rest back in place. We'll bump our lathe on. And I'll be using an easy wood tool. This is a carbide cutter. And I'll set this to a rough 45 degree. And then we can cut a small little chamfer on each side. Alright, let's stop the lathe and take a look. Do one more pass on this side. And then one more on this side just as a final pass. Perfect. So now we have a nice little chamfer. It adds a little bit of decoration to it and makes it a little more comfortable to wear. So now that we have this chamfered, we have our CA finish nice and sanded flat, we can go ahead and use our magic juice to polish this out, and then the ring will be done. Alright, with the magic juice, we'll want this around 2500 RPM. And we'll start with the number 1 bottle. And just a small little pea-sized amount on the rag. And we'll be polishing the core and the blank itself. So you can see how the rag's already gone gray. That's from the metal coming off. Get a clean side of the rag and wipe off any polish before we go to the next grit. Go on to the number 2 polish. Same thing, wipe it off. And you can see the shine is coming up quite a bit already on just even on the second polish. We're on to number 4 now. Now we're on to number 5. And then lastly, the number 6. And this stuff's a lot thinner viscosity than the other polishes, so it's easy to put too much on the rag. Just be mindful of that. Okay, and then we'll just buff that with a clean section of rag. We can stop the lathe and take a look. Okay, that looks really good. We've got a really high gloss on both the metal and the CA finish, and that pattern and the colors we have in this blank look really good. So let's take this off the lathe and I can show you guys. Just wipe away any polish that's on the inside of that blank. So there's our ring complete. I'm really happy with the polish and the shine we have on both the blank and the core itself. That little 45-degree chamfer adds a nice little decorative touch, and it makes it more comfortable to wear as well. So hopefully you guys learned some things. Go check out these new ring blanks from Hobble Creek Craftsman. We've got them on the site, so go take a look. And if you guys have any questions or comments, leave them in the section below. And if you want more wood turning videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel.